Good morning and welcome to Daily Devotions with Pastor Joe. I'm Pastor Joe. And for this morning, we're looking at Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, right here in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. We've just completed talking last week about chapter 5, verses 48 was the end there, where Jesus is talking about loving not only your neighbors, but also loving your enemies, and helping and praying for those who hate you, treat you wrongly, and despitefully use you. And so here in Matthew chapter 6, Jesus starts out and says, "Take heed that ye do not your alms before men to be seen of them." And that is something that is very counterintuitive to these people. He is speaking something that they think, well, oh my goodness, how come we can't do this? I'm sure many of them were thinking in that moment, that's completely the opposite of what we've heard over and over again. It's not what the scribes and the Pharisees and the high priests have taught us by their examples. And he says, "Take heed that ye do not your alms before men to be seen of them. Otherwise ye have no reward of your Father which is in heaven." Or in other words, he makes it very clear and very simple to note that when we do our giving, whether it's giving our offering, whether it's giving to the poor and needy, or whoever it may be, in order to be seen, so the purpose is so that we can be seen, then we are in fact in a very bad position and predicament in our lives, because if the point is to be seen by men, then God, our Father, will give us no reward. So consider it this way. Jesus is basically saying, when you do something good, don't shout out and look around and make sure somebody's watching so that they can see how good you are, but instead, just do your good deeds without a desire to be seen. You see, Jesus isn't often talking about the law throughout this Sermon on the Mount so much as he's talking about the attitudes of our hearts, because it is by the attitudes of our heart that we will ultimately be judged. It's all about the heart attitude. Jesus talked about how hating your brother and using evil names against him is equivalent to murder. About how a heart attitude and desire of adultery is the same thing as adultery. Lust is the same thing as adultery. He talked about revenge being something that we need to avoid and not have anything to do with, but instead leave that all in God's hands and treat others with love. And here, he's making it very crystal clear that we should not have a prideful heart about the things that we accomplish and do, and our giving and our kindnesses towards one another. He continues and says, "Therefore, when thou doest thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory of men." So he's making it clear once again that the whole reason why they make such a big deal and a show about it is because they want glory of men. They want to be seen by people. They want people to know what they're doing and how good they are. And Jesus says, "Verily I say unto you that they have their reward." They have their reward. They're not getting anything else. There's nothing else special going to come into their lives as a result of their giving. God does not have a reward prepared for them because they have technically, ultimately, rejected the reward that God had for them, because they wanted the reward of being seen by men instead. And that's pretty awful to consider. They're ultimately giving up the great things for the lowly things that are not that awesome to have. To have admiration of men is far inferior to having the admiration of God. Having God look at you and say that I'm proud to call him my child is much better than having somebody look at you and say, look at that, he's the best giver in our church, or she's the best giver in the block. The most giving person I know. Now, that doesn't mean that just because you're a very giving person that you're wrong or you're in the wrong place. In fact, it's not got anything to do with that at all. Jesus isn't saying don't give. He's not saying that at all. He says instead in verse 3, "But when thou doest alms, when you give, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret himself shall reward thee openly." So instead of wanting to be seen by man, just admire the idea of being seen by God. Be thankful that you can be seen by God when you do the great things that you do. And so it is perfectly fine to do good deeds. It is perfectly fine to be a giving individual. But it shouldn't be so that your name can be shouted out and so that people can admire you. That's not the reason that you should be giving. So, what does Jesus say here ultimately? He's saying when you go to accomplish a great thing and to give something to somebody that is in need, don't call the media around you and trumpet it all over the networks. Don't go and blast it all over the place. Refuse the option to have your name put up in lights and admiration for what you've done. Don't go and give just so that you can be seen. Now, we could also question during this, and this thought just came to me, what about plaques that people give, in the church when they give money towards new windows or towards a carpet or towards the pews or towards a new bell tower or something of that sort? Well, I would question this. What's the attitude and the motive of the hearts of the individuals who are putting the money down? I know many people who, in these instances, whenever they're offered to have a little bronze plate or something of that sort, they say no thank you, and they would rather maybe even give that bronze plate to in remembrance of somebody else who they're sort of dedicating that giving for, that they're doing it in remembrance of a grandfather or a grandmother or somebody who was an important pillar in the church at some point. And I would say be careful on even those kinds of instances. Basically what I'm saying is we as Christians, Jesus seems to be saying we as Christians, should not look for recognition on this earth. The recognition we should be looking for is God recognizing us for our goodness. Because there's going to come a day when we're in eternity and God is going to separate to his right hand and to his left. And to his right hand he's going to say, "Well done, thou good and faithful servants. You've been faithful, as he said in the parable of the talents. You've been faithful in a few things and be ruler over many." He's basically saying, I'm going to reward you greatly. And he says this over and over again throughout his teachings. Jesus over and over again repeats the idea that when we have the right attitude and we're doing things for the right reasons, God is going to reward us for those things. You may get a reward here on earth, and that's fine to get rewarded. But our motive should never be about the reward. Our motive should be about helping and loving and showing the love of God to those who have a need. So don't be showing off your goodness or your treasures for your own goodness, for your own sake. And the religious leaders made a huge deal about all the good deeds they did, but Jesus clearly tells us that we need to avoid the desire to be seen for our good actions and let God handle rewarding us instead of man rewarding us. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me for another Daily Devotions with Pastor Joe. I hope you have a wonderful day in the Lord. God bless. I'll see you tomorrow on another Daily Devotions with Pastor Joe.